This evening, we are joined by artists Allan Wexler and Virgil Marty. We will be chatting with them momentarily. Before we get started, we would like to make sure that you have a comfortable viewing experience. To that end, it is my pleasure to introduce Marcy Peterson, who will be handling all of our technical needs throughout the program. Marcy, can you provide us with some tech tips for this webinar?
Sure, Pam, thank you. I would like to welcome everyone and let you know that this presentation is a Zoom webinar. So you will see the host and the artist presenting, but they won't see you. So what you'll do is open the Q&A window to ask your questions. As an attendee, you can also like other attendees' questions. But you've already used the chat box, and you can go back to that chat box to follow along for links for additional resources. And if you find a friend, text between attendees in the chat box. I want to assure you, should you lose connection for any reason, please don't worry. You can close out the windows that you have open, go right back to your email, or go to another device and go back to that email and open that email and join right in again. This session is being recorded, so you won't miss that little bit if you have to go back. And again, as this is a webinar, only the host and the panelists will be heard and recorded. One other thing is to customize your experience should you need. There is a small green icon up in the upper left of your screen, and that accesses your personal settings. And you can click on that and then click over to the gear, and you'll get a whole list of settings there. And I wanted to mention that there are 3 types of support for WheatonArts: membership, donations, and shop.WheatonArts.org. If you'd like more information or to discuss different types of giving to support WheatonArts, you could contact Rhody Barron, Director of Development, at the number here or by her email, and I'll put that in the chat, as I will many other links through the evening. Membership is the most beneficial way to support WheatonArts, and I'll also include that link, and know that gift memberships are always available. Right now, Sketchmanion is making pumpkins behind the scenes at WheatonArts, and it is pumpkin season, making it pumpkin season, and you can see a lot of those pumpkins on shop.WheatonArts.org. So if you're not local, don't worry. If you are local and you prefer not to come in person on our new hours, Saturday and Sunday at 11 a.m., from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., you can still shop online and use curbside pickup. They'll bring your purchase right to your car and place it in your car for you. As I said, the new hours are Saturdays and Sundays from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And you will need to get tickets if you are going into the museum, the Folklife Center, or the Folklife Center. And they are timed tickets. That's also in at shop.WheatonArts.org or WheatonArts.org/tickets. Back to you, Pam.
Thank you, Marcy. It's now my pleasure to introduce Kristen. As the Director of Exhibitions and Collections at WheatonArts, Kristen Qualls manages the Museum of American Glass. She was an integral part of the award-winning 6-year project, Emanation. She currently serves on the board of the New Jersey Association of Museums and acts as a reviewer for the statewide artifact assessment program. Prior to joining Wheaton, Kristen was the collections and exhibits specialist at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Qualls received an MFA in Museum Exhibition Planning and Design from the University of the Arts. She also served on the board of the Small Museum Association. Kristen, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Pam. And thank you, Marcy, for shepherding us through on the tech. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for what I'm sure will be a wonderful conversation. I'm not sure where you all are coming from, but down here in South Jersey, it's kind of rainy and dreary. So thank you. You can curl up next to the light of our screens with maybe a cup of hot tea or some hot chocolate or whatever beverage will warm you, and enjoy talking with Allan and Virgil. I've been lucky enough to get to work with them on the Emanation project, and so I'm really excited to get to share with you some of the conversations I've been able to have with them. So first, I'm going to introduce them. Then they're each going to give us a bit of a background on their work, so we can have a bit broader context on who they are as artists and what inspires them. Then I'm going to go a little bit through what they did here at WheatonArts while they worked on the Emanation project, and then we'll open up for questions and conversations. So now let me introduce. First, we have Virgil Marty. He's a Philadelphia-based artist who infuses objects of taste, high culture, and aesthetic excess with allusions to his first loves, as cultivated in a suburban crafts-based world of macrame, giant lucite grapes, and blacklight posters. That these worlds eventually collide, rendering their socioeconomic origins indistinguishable, is the logical expression of his artistic project. Marty worked for many years as master print coordinator and project coordinator at the Fabric Workshop Museum in Philadelphia. He's also had exhibits at the Wadsworth Atheneum, where he drew parallels between Romantic poet John Keats and artist Paul Thek, and posed an ambitious follow-up to the exhibition he curated for the ICA in Philadelphia, the collection of the Museum of American Art, or more precisely, their storage areas, which he rated for furniture and decorative arts. He was also given the task of drawing from the major museum collections holdings based upon the RISD Museum of Art's 1969 Raid the Icebox with Andy Warhol. I'm also going to introduce Allan Wexler. Allan has worked in the fields of architecture, design, and fine art for over 45 years. His career completely resists any easy classification. In the late 60s, he was an early member of the group of architects and artists who really were questioning the perceived divide between art and design disciplines. They called themselves non-architects or paper architects. So the subject of Wexler's work is the built environment. He creates drawings, multimedia objects, images, and installations that alter perceptions of domestic activities. He investigates eating, bathing, sitting, socializing, and turns these everyday activities into ritual and theater. I couldn't be more excited to hear from these two wonderful artists. So I believe Virgil is going to share some of his work with us first. So I hand it over to you, Virgil, and thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Kristen, and thank you, everybody. I'm gonna see if I can do this.
While Virgil does that, I just want to make a note that Julie Courtney is joining us as an attendee. So I want all the panelists to know that she is here to enjoy our presentations tonight.
Okay, so I'm ready to share. Let's see. Oops. That's the last slide. Here we go. Okay. Hopefully that's the last glitch. So I'm showing here an image of a project I did in 1995, or 1997 actually. It's called Beer Can Library. It is a trompe-l'oeil photo screen print, a 4-color process screen print of my beer can collection from when I was a teenager. And I wanted to show it because I thought it had a funny kind of echo in the project that I ended up doing at Wheaton for the first Emanation show. And a lot of the work I was doing after graduate school, I finished at Tyler in 1990 and then started working at the Fabric Workshop and Museum. And I was making a lot of, I was making wallpapers. That was my main practice. And I would design wallpapers initially for a specific place or with a particular location in mind, but then with the idea that they could be reprinted and reinstalled in other places and have take on different meanings depending on the context. So using the architecture of the space as a frame that would inform the way the work read. So these beer cans were stored in the basement of my parents' suburban house. And I liked the idea, this is installed at the Greater oh gosh, I'm blanking. A mansion on Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. So I like the idea of elevating this middle-class hobby of my teenage years into this nouveau riche mansion on Rittenhouse Square. And this was actually a show that Julie Courtney curated. We go to the next slide. Another wallpaper, this one from 2000, or 2001 actually, called Untitled Landscape Wallpaper, which was designed and installed at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. I was interested I'm often interested in the way that artistic styles get reappropriated by future generations. So this is sort of taking Hudson River School landscape painting, which I associate with the Academy, and running it through the filter of 1970s hippie head shops and blacklight posters of the Garden of Eden. Also incorporating blacklight poster versions of architectural details from the Furness building, like the wainscoting. The flame border that you see is actually derived or adaptation of a Frank Furness fireplace, pressed tin fireplace back. And thinking about this idea that the way that hippie culture and psychedelic posters had appropriated Art Nouveau design. A lot of times what I'll use film as a source of inspiration also for projects. So for this particular installation, I was thinking about the Nicholas Roeg film, The Man Who Fell to Earth, this scene of David Bowie as a space alien playing ping pong in an astroturfed room with this landscape photo mural. And then also another 1970s science fiction film, Soylent Green, where elderly people were euthanized to turn into food, but during their dying days or their last minutes, they would be shown these images of nature while Beethoven would play. So this is an overall view of the installation. In the center of the room is a large take on a freeform, like hippie candle, like you might have found in a head shop with driftwood. And there's the original prototype, I'll show you later in the presentation. This is a project from 2000, so right around the same time. This is not strictly chronological. I'm jumping back and forth a little bit. This project is called Couch. It was installed at the Ardmore train station on the Philadelphia main line. And the inset image you see there is my couch that I live with at home, which is a George Nelson designed couch. It was originally designed for Braniff Airlines waiting rooms. And it has Alexander Gerard fabric in the colors of Braniff Airlines. So what I did for this project, I wanted to make a domesticated version of this sort of public space couch that I live with at home, make a domesticated version of it and reinsert it into a public space, i.e. the train waiting room. And I particularly chose this waiting room or Ardmore train station because it's one of the few train stations on the main line that was demolished. Originally, they were mostly Frank Furness designs, I believe, and they're still in existence, but this one had been demolished in the 50s and replaced with this really awful cinder block bunker. So I was trying to like introduce a note of comfort into this really inhospitable space. The ferns were already there. I didn't add those, but I don't think they were doing quite enough. So, and this was also a project that Julie Courtney curated. So I made a number of these since that time, these furniture sculptures. They kind of can be traced back to work I'm not showing you, but what I was doing in graduate school, which was, by the time I made my thesis show, I would go and buy fabrics and stretch them onto painting chassis and not actually apply paint to them, but just stretch the fabric as I found it. And I was way that could maybe circumvent some of my prejudices, or I could choose things that I wouldn't come up with necessarily on my own. Like I would never think to design that giant herringbone woven fabric, but somebody else did. And it was a way to kind of broaden my opportunity or broaden my choices, I guess, and not be locked into what I would just automatically go to. But I realized that I was actually making conscious decision about things in terms of what I selected. And it had to do with rescuing things that I thought nobody else was going to buy. Like if I didn't buy it, it was going to languish in the store forever. So it was kind of rooting for the underdog, salvaging these things and seeing if I could elevate them into something beautiful. This is a poof it's titled For Venus of the Rags, after the Michelangelo Pistoletto sculpture. This is a project that I did at the ICA in 2013, or gosh, 2010. I was invited to go into the storage of the Philadelphia Museum of Art and select some items to curate an exhibition from. And the stipulation was that they had to be things that were in storage and not currently on view. So I was happy to do this. And that's one of the perks of being an artist and making the kind of work I do. I really love to go into museum storage and look around at what they have. So I decided for this exhibition, which is called Set Pieces, to organize the show around a series of 4 films that are particular favorites of mine. And I'm only going to show you one vignette from the exhibition, but this is the section of the exhibition that was organized and inspired by Michelangelo Antonioni's film La Ventura. And there's a sequence in the film. This is probably the first art film I ever saw as a kid. They showed it on PBS on a Saturday, and I remember watching it on my parents' black and white portable television set. But this film burned itself into my brain, and there's a sequence where a boating party lands on an island and a young woman goes missing. And so there's quite a long sequence where the other passengers are just roaming this landscape looking for her. And when I saw the busts that were in storage at the Philadelphia Museum, I decided that I wanted to try to cast them in this film as the people looking for the lost woman on the island. And one of the things that was interesting about storage is the way sometimes things end up together that don't necessarily, they would never be shown together in the museum if it was showing them in a chronological sequence or by particular makers. They end up together because it happens to be there's room in that case so that they can include them. So these things were in storage together, and this bust of a woman was lying on its side like this, which is not the way it would be shown if it was installed in the museum. But I was able to prevail upon the conservators and the curators to allow me to show it this way, because I wanted to suggest that she was having a reverie while these other people were kind of looking past her and looking at each other, looking for her, but not finding her. And then I was also invited by curator Michael Taylor, who used to be at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, who was doing an exhibition about Picasso and Cubism. And he had this idea of recreating the Cubist salon of 1918 and commissioned me to make a settee for the exhibition because there's a black and white photograph of that show that shows this formal poof in the middle of the gallery. So I was invited to make a poof for the exhibition. And this piece is called Sigmund. It's also from 2010, sort of a metaphorical portrait of Sigmund Freud. This was at the Elizabeth D. Gallery in New York. This is a wallpaper called Memorial Garden. That is, I used a photograph that I took I made a visit to Graceland, which I'd never been to. And I always wanted to go there. So I visited Graceland. I took a photograph of Elvis's grave. And I was there around the time of the anniversary of, I forget whether it was his death or his birth, but fans had left all these wreaths out by the grave site. And so I photographed them. They had been out in the weather for a while, so they were a little bedraggled, but I turned it into a sort of Victorian mourning pattern. This is a digital print, a digital inkjet wallpaper print with screen printed brown flocking. So you walked around that wall and then you would enter this room, which is another screen printed wallpaper of a trompe l'oeil drapery. It's called Austrian Swag. And after graduate school, I worked for the Fabric Workshop and Museum for a number of years as a printer and a project coordinator. So I went there really wanting to learn how to make wallpaper as a large part of my practice. Even though I come from a painting background, I started making installation work on my way out. My thesis show was an installation, and I've been primarily, I would consider myself an installation artist since then. But I like the idea that this wallpaper, I think in a way it references my background as a painter. I think of these as sort of, the wallpapers are sort of bastardizations of minimalism. Like they're ornate and they're heavily patterned, but the gesture of wallpaper on the wall is really kind of minimal in a way. So you start at one end and you just keep going until you reach the other end and you stop. So even though they're visually kind of complex, I think it's a really simple gesture in some ways. Also for this show, I made 2 more poofs that were sort of symbolic portraits of my parents. And I was thinking about Whistler's painting of his mother, which was called Arrangement in Black and Gray. So the black and blue poof is a portrait of my father. And the fact that Whistler had made this painting and called it Arrangement in Black and Gray when it was actually his mother outraged some critics, who thought it was really, you just couldn't do that. It was insensitive to like paint your mother and call it an arrangement. But this is my father. It's called Arrangement in Black and Blue. And the one with the floral chintz is called A Pot of Paint. And that's the portrait of my mother. And they're based on, my parents were elderly and a bit infirm at the time. It's based on their prescription medications. Each fabric references a different prescription medicine, and they're sequenced in the order of the time they would take them over the course of the day. These 4 looking glasses that are hanging on the wallpaper are based on original Chippendale and Queen Anne looking glasses, the profiles of them, but the colors are of the colors of the pill sorters that my parents used for their medications. You see here on the left, a 6-foot looking glass. These were all monochromes. So again, sort of alluding to my history as a painter before I started making sculpture and installation. I cast floorboards from the basement of the building where my studio was in Old City. I cast them in urethane and laminated them, and then I have them silvered through a special process. You'll see this is 6'1" is just a straight profile of a Chippendale mirror. But then the blue version on the right is called Blue Boy. I've introduced into that this mutation. It's adjustment introducing the Leonardo da Vinci drawing profile of a grotesque profile of a man. You might see this odd face sort of appearing into them. So this idea of a mutation or a hybrid or something evolving is something that goes throughout my work and appears in what I did for Wheaton as well. This is a project from, I was invited to the Wadsworth Athenaeum. So I began, this was in, 2013. I went through their storage. I was really intrigued by their they have a great collection of Hudson River School landscape paintings. Odd things like this molten mass of firearms from the Colt factory fire back in Hartford. Lower left is a chair carved from the Connecticut Charter Oak. Things like this Carlo Bugatti chair, lower right. So I was intrigued by these items. And then I came across this death mask of the poet John Keats. That's what you're seeing in the upper right. The English Romantic poet who died quite young at the age of 28. And this object had been given to the museum but never shown. And in doing some research on it, I realized that there was also supposedly a life mask made of John Keats. So I tracked that down. I thought it was quite interesting that having only lived to 28, that there would be both a life mask and a death mask made of him. These put me in mind of a photograph of the artist Paul Teck. That's what you see on the lower left by the photographer Frank McDara, of Paul Teck lying next to his sculpture of a dead hippie, where he had cast his own face to make this effigy of the hippie. It's his most famous artwork, The Tomb, also known as Death of a Hippie, but it's disappeared. The work is no longer exists. It got lost over time. So I wanted for this exhibition to try to use these masks of Keats to conjure this lost Paul Teck artwork and to reunite the life masks and the death masks. So I made a poof to hold the life mask, and I made this monstrance on the right of cast aluminum branches to hold the death mask of Keats. Here's an overhead shot. So, and all of this, thinking of Keats, the English Romantic poet, as sort of a prototypical, what would become hippies in the 60s, incorporating macrame and making these faux bois benches out of cement that you might find out in a pastoral landscape garden, like an English landscape garden. The looking glasses took their cue from paintings in the Athenaeum's collection. This is a Thomas Cole painting called Life, Death, and Immortality. So I would lift the palettes from some of their paintings to color the looking glasses. You can see, this is a detail of one of the looking glasses. You can see the floorboard texture. I also realized that I was in effect making these trompe-l'oeil floorboard paintings, which this is a Harnett painting from the Wadsworth Athenaeum's collection. This is a Frederick Church painting from the Athenaeum's collection, which resulted in a looking glass I made, which is titled Thanatopsis. So all of these works together in an installation called Ode to a Hippie. This is another one of the faux bois benches. This one's called Gremlin in the Studio, named after a Martin Johnson Heade painting in the collection at the Athenaeum. Here's a detail of the, this is all hand built, it's not cast. So it's a bit like fresco. You have a certain amount of working time before it becomes impossible to work it. This is called Tête-à-Tête. So after the Athenaeum project, I came to Wheaton to do my Emanations project, and ended up making this installation sculpture called Broken Tulips. I was really intrigued by the Art Nouveau glass in the collection at the museum, and wanted to see if the glass technicians and people blowing for me things like this. Initially, we were going to cut them and flatten them out into pins, but I really just fell in love with them staying as vessels. And Broken Tulips is a reference to when you've got a tulip that's yellow, say, and it's got a flame red patterning in it, it's caused by a virus. And eventually the virus will die out in those tulip bulbs, but it makes them very rare and sought after. So I was thinking of these vessels as they kind of, for me, evoked those broken tulips with their flame patterning, and the way that the patterning would shift slightly from one to the next was kind of reminded me of the transmission of a virus. And I designed these stands that are a bit like aquarium stands, and everyone was so great helping to make these. There were a number of people blowing them, so you can sort of tell which ones were made by which artist, and because they each had a slightly different style. But again, that was something that allowed me to arrive at something that I wouldn't have come to on my own. This idea of working collaboratively with people, which is also something I did when I was working at the Fabric Workshop, working with artists to help achieve their vision. I installed it with the Austrian swag wallpaper because I thought there was a really nice echo with the patterning in the glass, and also because the museum at Wheaton has that fabulous red flocked wallpaper when you first walk in. So I thought it'd be nice to have a bit more wallpaper later in the museum experience. So then after the my getting to do that project at Wheaton, which was really wonderful, and thank you to everybody who worked on it, and Hank Adams, who was running the studio at the time, and Julie Courtney for I went to the John Michael Kohler Art Center to do a project. This is an exhibition, it's called Hot House. And it was, the framework for the show was a number of artists were invited to do something that was sort of about their studio, their studio space and what it's like to be in their studio space. And so this was 2018. And I installed, the new things I made for this show were these freestanding mirror panels. They're 4 by 8 feet. I wanted to use them as a way to sort of segment the space. I've for a while been interested in working with mirrors that don't actually function the way they're supposed to. I installed a number of works dating back to the earliest one being to like something I made in 1972, up through things I collect. This is from the Ode to a Hippie show. This piece is called Cemetery Gates. I reinstalled it for this exhibition because it was sitting around my studio in a crate, and I thought I might as well get it out and install it. This is using the base of the monstrance for the Keats Mass, but installed on top of it is a piece called 100 cc's of fluorescent air. It's a terrarium that I made when I was 10 years old. It's been in my studio ever since then. It's never been opened. So I was using these standing mirror panels in some instances to create like an infinite regression. There was a lot of stuff in the show, but they also made things kind of disappear and feel isolated. So you could be alone with a sculpture even though there was a lot more stuff just behind these panels. And in some cases, the mirror panels would reflect something that you would be standing in front of an object, but they'd be reflecting something that you weren't actually looking at the time, like these stretched out soda bottles that I collect. You might be looking at them, but seeing the reflection of the terrarium in the mirror. I included this piece that I made in 1999. It's called Salon Garage. It's a digital collage photo C print, a digital C print of a couple. It seemed to have everything. Even though I made it in 1999, it seemed to have everything in it that I was making in the studio. And I just had this realization like, oh, I've been making chandeliers. I've made these Chippendale tabletops. I have a mirror ball. I have built a studio that's actually a garage attached to another space. So I really wanted to include it. There's a tire in it. This was a piece I made for the show. It's called Junior. It's a silver-plated tire that's been rainbow colored, sitting on top of a Chippendale mahogany tabletop on top of a poof. It was a bit of a nod to the Rauschenberg sculpture monogram. And through it, you see another sculpture. This is what I was talking about earlier, the prototype for the Paffa hippie candle sculpture. Other things I collect are these R.W. Barry's figurines, another Chippendale tabletop. I think I'm taking too much time, but I'm almost done. This is a project from 2017 at the Barnes Foundation, exhibition that Judith Tannenbaum and Tom Collins curated called Person of the Crowd. I proposed making two identical poofs. The piece is called Doppelganger. And I was able to install one of them in the first gallery that you enter when you're at the Barnes. And the second one, its Doppelganger, was installed outside the Barnes. So they were there simultaneously. And the one Doppelganger, the one part of the sculpture would stay in this painting gallery for the length of the show. Its double would travel around the city to various locations over the course of the exhibition. So first it went to Taller Puerto Riqueño in North Philadelphia. And from there, it went to the Smith Memorial Playground in Fairmount Park. All the while, its double was back at the Barnes Foundation. From there, it went to the Japanese house, Shofuso in Fairmount Park. And finally ending up at Laurel Hill Cemetery as its final location, while its counterpart was still at the Barnes Foundation. So I think that's the last project I have to show. I'm just going to close with this image from Eastern State Penitentiary, the exhibition Prison Sentences. This is a piece called For Oscar Wilde, which it was back in 1995, which Allan was also in. And even though we were both in the show, this is the first time we're really having a conversation together. So I'm now going to hand it over to Allan, or if I can get it to stop sharing.
All right. Thank you so much, Wheaton Art Glass, for inviting me to have a conversation with Virgil. I hadn't realized how many overlapping issues and relationships we've had over the years and never have met before. Even, I don't know if we've met at the opening of this project, which was Prison Sentences, which also Julie Courtney, who I owe a great deal of thanks to for inviting me to Prison Sentences. And then, of course, more recently to do a residency at Wheaton Art Glass, which was really pushed me in new directions. And I'm sure Virgil and I will talk about the both, we had a short conversation already about our anxieties of working in a medium that we never worked with before. So this is my version of prison sentences as a segue between myself and Virgil. You know, we were each given a cell to experiment with, and I inserted a new cell within the cell. I won't go there, but it was the concept had to do with in this prison. This was an artist retreat.
Excuse
The only
me,
difference.
Allan.
Yes.
I know you want to hear this. Do you want to hit swap displays so we can see it?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
now you're okay. Last time it was the other way around. So anyway, back to so this is called Prison Sentences, and this is about an artist in retreat versus a prisoner in isolation. And in my interior cell, the lock was on the inside as opposed to a lock on the outside. And the concept was all of the artist in retreat made functional dinnerware and paper out of the elements of the cell itself. The scenario was that a brown paper bag lunch was given to the artist in retreat every day, and out of the contents of that bag, leftover food and dinnerware and plastic takeout containers or Coke or the bottom of Coca-Cola cans, artwork is made from the remnants of the cell. But I'm not going to go there. That's a more complicated project to talk about in 20 minutes. So I'll just start with this project, which was actually a project that I did at for my, I would say, a kind of thesis project or a final exhibition at Rhode Island School of Design in 1971 or 72, when I graduated in architecture from RISD. And I was a bad boy architect. I felt myself, I wanted to be the Andy Warhol of architecture. Both of our initials, AW, were the same. And I thought that coincidence was just too much to ignore. So I wanted to be a kind of edgy, controversial, provocative person within the field of architecture. And this is from 1972, and it's a rubber T-square. And if you know T-squares, which most young people don't know about T-squares anymore because all drawings are done digitally and virtually, when you draw a line in plan, the implication is that in the third dimension, it can be an infinite amount of possibilities. So I'm trying to play that idea of precision, imprecision, the two-dimensional version in this as a straight line, but in its third dimension being a variable. Then just some background material to give you a sense of where I came from when I was given this commission to spend a year in residence at the glassblowing facility. My work really bridges between the fine art and the applied art. And I think Virgil and I will have a lot to talk about in terms of, I approach, we're both artists, but I start from the functional, from the decorative arts world and move towards sculpture and fine art. And whereas Virgil is starting from the fine art painting world and moving toward the, I would say, the decorative arts, the functional arts. So in that way, we kind of cross boundaries in between. This was a project I did in 1990 as a commission for the gallery at University of Massachusetts. And they asked 3 other architects to build a room. The project was called Home Rooms. And they asked us to think about the coming decade, 1990. What is the coming decade like? And at that time, I was doing an installation, which was a riff on a picnic area at the DeCordova Museum in Lincoln, Massachusetts, which was around the corner from Walden Pond. And I got very interested in Thoreau's cabin at Walden Pond and the idea of living alone, living in isolation, albeit with him, he was very close to his mother, so he can go home for a nice cooked meal. So I was thinking about containing space, containing the everyday incidents, artifacts of our everyday life in these these crates, which tend to look like dioramas that you might find in a museum of natural history, an anthropological museum. And yet what we're looking at in this diorama are everyday objects that come from our contemporary life. So I'm looking at contemporary relics as if they are ancient relics. I'm looking at history now. So also the crate as the crate is normally used to contain fine art. It's a protective device that holds fine art. And what I'm doing is using a crate to hold our lives. And then there's an 8-foot cube within which these crates each can roll into that interior of that cube to activate the space. So there are 4 rooms. Each room is the size in profile of a standard door opening. When the kitchen rolls into the cube, the entire cube becomes a kitchen. When you want to sleep, the kitchen rolls out of the cube and the bedroom rolls into the cube. I was very influenced by Japanese tea ceremony and also traditional Japanese architecture, which is, you know, a small house could become luxurious by overlapping functions. So at the daytime, the tatami mats are put in a closet and the entire house becomes a living space, a daytime space. And just to kind of show the kind of direction or chronology of my work is I return to earlier projects and rethink those projects. I don't think that the work kind of rebounds and riffs on work that I've done before. So here's a project I did just a few years ago called Picnicking Bicycle. And it is a bicycle that contains, that has these accretions, these outcroppings, I don't know if that's a good word, that hold the functional necessary utensils and dinnerware for a picnic. So you have a box for the salt shaker, a box for the pepper shaker, a box for Tupperware, a styrofoam cooler box, a thermos box, a wine glass box. So every single element, including a checkered tablecloth, and also including a can of Cutter's insect repellent. So I'm looking at the continuity of everyday life. We wake up in the morning and we make coffee in the morning. We turn on a faucet. As a quote architect / artist, I'm interested in the awesomeness of everyday things. So in the morning when you turn your faucet on, and it's amazing that water comes out of that valve that comes from the earth. Here, coffee seeks its own level, a kind of play on the Japanese tea ceremony where the tea master gives tea to the guest. And who is it that is given tea first? And who acknowledges their guest, and this idea of guest and host and who drinks first. So here is, I couldn't very well rip off the Japanese tea ceremony as an American, but I could look at coffee as a daily ritual. So here 4 people sit around a table drinking coffee. If one person lifts the cup before the others, it overflows, flows downhill and overflows the cup and makes a mess on the tablecloth. If you notice, the tablecloth has a lot of staining on it. So then, as a designer knows that problems are what designers and architects thrive on. We love gravity. We love budget, climate, wind direction. But here is a problem to be solved, a messy, dirty, stained tablecloth. So what I did is I made ceramic coffee cups to cover the stain, to purify the tablecloth. The typical dining room table. This is table for the typical house. I did this in 2010. Perhaps that drawing on the left was done earlier, but I had the opportunity at an exhibition at University of Manitoba in Winnipeg to do this installation where I built 4 rooms in which a table intersects the 4 rooms. So 4 people eat alone at the same table, the typical American family, eating together, but eating alone. However, I solved the problem of isolation, by only having one salt shaker on one table, a pepper shaker on another, a bottle of mustard on another, and a bottle of ketchup on another. So I did this in what's the date here? 2010, way before the pandemic. And now it's interesting because so much of my work had to do with social distancing, but it was not distancing because of COVID. It was distancing because of social interaction and psychology and how we put walls up between each other. And his architecture is a trigger that can activate human interaction and community. So I've got very interested in community and social engagement. This is a project called I Want to Become Architecture. I realized after many years, and I thought of myself as an architect until fairly recently. Now I realize that I'm an artist trapped in an architect's body. I want to make myself architecture. So I push myself into a wall, and it's flat planes. This is, the problem of sheetrock, the problem of plywood makes cubism. So here I sheathe my body in plywood, and the plywood doesn't give like fabric, and it creates a pixelized version of me. Now last summer, I learned how to sew. So now I am working in fabric. My grandfather, when he came from Eastern Europe, was a tailor. And perhaps there is that in my blood that in the end, I want to become a fashion designer, perhaps. So I've tried to make projects that are about the physicality of the body in relationship to the external world, whether it's an extension of the skin as in fabric, or the extension of the room as in a sheetrock wall, or the world as a cosmos, and so on. So, and then as I was interested in the idea of water, when you turn your faucet on, this awesome experience, this project is called Half a Bottle on the left, and on the right it is called Hat Roof, and they were both done in 1994. This is before we realized, and before Flint, Michigan's incident of contaminated water, we now realize, and we took it for granted in 1994, but now we know that water is precious. It's a sacred, it's a commodity. There are battles that have been fought over water. So I was riffing on this idea of the preciousness of water. Every drop of water is saved, and it's drained through the brim of a hat, which is like a roof, it's like a gutter. And that hat roof, which has been plasticized and fiberglass, has tubing that connects to the brim that drains all of the water into repurposed Evian bottled water. And then as you see on the brim of the hat, there's a little crease there with a downspout that even takes the drops of water from that crease to preserve it and protect it. A more recent piece, but a few years before the pandemic, I did these pieces, and I put these in because this is a nice transition to Wheaton. These were called, I can't remember what I call them. I think they're called voice boxes. And it was about the idea of expression and breathing and diverting in the gases from your body into the space around you. They were transformations of I think N95 masks, and so I made variations on those. And then when I ran out of them in my studio, because I really needed dust masks, it was too late to get them because already I used up all my dust masks, and now I'm stuck without them because of the pandemic. And then Julie Courtney called me and said, "Would you like to do a residency at Wheaton Glass?" And I said, "What? I've never worked in glass before." And I thought this was a fantastic opportunity. Whenever Julie asked me to do something like, I said, of course, I would because she's, you know, so wonderful to work with. And she, you know, it pushed me in new directions because I'd never worked in glass. You would think an quote, former architect would have worked in glazing and glass and so on. It's a incredible building material. So the first thing I did before I had the opportunity to go visit Wheaton, I spent a few months before I actually visited Wheaton. I said, at least I could work and experiment with window glass. So I learned how to cut glass, and I glued glass together to make various projects. And I made this glass mask. And it's, again, not unlike I want to become architects. That's what I mean when I look back at my career and my work. It's a return to things that are just, it's my personality, it's in the air. It's things that I've loved working with. So I made this, mask out of fragments of glass that tries to become a soft fabric form. Now we move into Wheaton. This is a photograph of the installation at Wheaton, where I'm using blown glass to extend and expand my body into space. So I'll go into a little detail here. I think, Marcy, you're going to show this video because I had trouble with my internet.
Yes.
You can show it. This is a video. I was really lucky to work at Wheaton at the time. They had a wonderful young filmmaker who was documenting constantly our experience at Wheaton. So here's a little video clip of me working at Wheaton. And that's Skitch Mannion is a master at glass blowing. That's Skitch there. He organized the shop and he worked directly with me. And I couldn't have done this project without Skitch. So I hope Skitch is in the audience because I owe him a lot. I met such wonderful people at Wheaton over those several months going down there back and forth for that year. That mold is in their collection, and it's a standard apothecary jar mold. And the man who built that mold was the inventor of screw caps. And I did a series of transformations of that standard bottle form, which I'm not showing you today, just by starting from that mold and blowing into it differently. Well. Now I brought that form made out of cherry plywood, and that's the profile of my shoulder. You'll see in a little while. So I was able to make that in my wood shop, in my studio. I think here we could stop the video because this is about the actual installation itself. Okay, you're seeing two drawings up on the screen, right?
Correct.
Okay, good. Somehow there was one missing, which shows, so just in terms of process of working with Wheaton glass, I would, in my studio, make a series of investigative drawings, all on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. And I did about 50 pages, each experimenting with different ideas about what I could have the Wheaton people blow for me. And I would then have them blow these forms. I would take them back to my studio and then, continue to change them and perfect them. So here you'll see this piece here, which I'll show you in a minute. It's a kind of form here, and then these were other versions of glass pieces, and these are some other riffs on different possible shapes. And then we go to this image here. So what I would do is make drawings, and then I would then bring those down, and it was really scary when I first started. I went down. This is when Hank Adams was head of the glass shop, and then shortly after I started, Skitch took over that position. So I didn't know what to do, but I came down with a 50 sheets, and I started to talk to Hank about different possibilities. And he said, "Let's try one." And of course, what? I'm going to try one right now? He said, "Here's a piece of chalk, draw a form on the ground." So I drew this shape that you're seeing in this photograph in chalk on the ground, and he blew it for me. So this is one of the early pieces that was blown at Wheaton Glass that I got right into it, and it was a wonderful experience because he broke the ice. He said, "Just try it," and he got me loosened up enough, and it was wonderful to be pushed into doing something rather than going back again to New York and say, "Oh, now I'm going to go back in about a few weeks and do some more, and I'm not sure what to do." Anyway, it was a great way to get started. So here, Skitch is blowing this bubble, a molten glass, blowing it with his breath, blowing his breath into a molten glass above. And then I wanted to take Skitch's breath and blow mine into it. So it's a kind of exchange going on here. This piece is called Breath. And I just like the photograph on the right. It's all the parts that were used to retrofit this bubble and to allow it to connect to my body. And then two other pieces from the Wheaton show, other kinds of externalized internal bladders that, when we think about conveying liquids, the earliest forms of conveying liquids from point A to point B were often animal bladders, which could be filled with a liquid and then transported. And so I was trying to think about, the basic body organs, and also, hearing and sight and breath. And so here is a project, I forgot what I call that, but it's a type of hearing aid made out of these glass funnels. And the one on the left is called amphora, which are, these organs that are worn on the body like bladders. And the one on the right I call vesicles, also another transport device. But I also I needed to get my hands into the making of glass, but glass scared me and I was afraid to actually physically blow it, and I didn't have the skill to do it. But I did have the skill because I learned how to sew, and I did have the skill to work with fiberglass and plumbing fixtures. So I'm taking a plumbing fixture, which you would never see, juxtaposed with a glass vessel, and put them together and create these juxtapositions, which make total sense. And then they are also absurdist in some way. So by pushing the absurdity, they become hopefully possibilities, I would say. This one is called Cradle. And then after I was working at Wheaton, actually before Wheaton, the local dump, I have a studio on the North Fork of Long Island as well as in New York City, and the local dump has a recycle center, and I started harvesting their glassware that was discarded, and I made this belt called Bottle Belt. I forgot what I call it. I forgot what I call that piece. Oh, it's called Harmonica. And harmonica is a instrument invented by Ben Franklin for making sound. They're glassware that are filled with water, and you know how you can screech a wine glass. And this one, when you walk, it makes sound. But also there are wine glasses and goblets that could be used to, you know, to drink liquid from. And the one on the right is called Bottle Belt. And this one is another vessel worn on the body as if it's a kind of scientific instrument that is conveying a gas or a liquid from point A to point B, worn like a harness, retrofitted to the body. So this is a little bit of the way also I worked while I was at Wheaton. I would make those little drawings, and then I would, on the little mannequin that I had, scale figure, I would use thermoplastic clay called Fimo, and I would sculpt the forms I wanted to have in relation to the body, and then I would blow them up and make these cardboard templates on an actual mannequin in my studio that would fit my body. And then I would bring that to Wheaton, and then Skitch and his crew would blow those forms. And I would make the template, as you saw in the video, that I could bring down, which was the shape of my neck, that they could drape the form over. And the one on the right, I don't even remember what I called that one, but that's, I had several pieces of glass that I couldn't get to before the show, Emanation show. So these were done after the Wheaton exhibition more recently, because these sat in my studio as surplus glassware. So I was grateful that I had an extra supply of glassware to work with. But these are from the video, and because a lot of my work is resolved through woodworking, I could at least make wood pieces. So in the Wheaton Art Center, they have quite a large collection of blow molds, one of which you saw in the video is an iron blow mold, and it has a patent number on it. And by doing a little research, I found out that the man who invented that standard apothecary jar blow mold invented screw caps, which was pretty interesting. And we did a series of transformations and variations on that apothecary jar, which I'm not showing you today, but I could make blow molds out of wood. Original blow molds, you would take a log, split the log in half, put some leather on it to make a hinge and some handles, and you would have the glass blower would melt a blob of glass and blow into a split log that had a void carved out of it to make a bottle form. So I started making these wooden blow molds, and those are starting with a cubic blow mold and slowly getting more and more pixelated until the last one here, you see approaching a standard, a kind of apothecary jar or a standard vessel form. So, and that's the last slide here, done fairly recently from one of my surplus pieces, was this one, where that blow mold could then become a device for carrying the fragile glassware. So you have, in terms of process, you have the tool used to make the glassware, then you have the glassware made from that tool, and then the tool becomes the carrying case to protect the glassware to convey it from point A to point B. So thank you so much. So that's my little overview of the work I did prior and during and after. Prior, during, and after. Thank you. Anyway.
Great. Thank you so much, Allan and Virgil, for sharing your work with us. Now I'm going to just show a few slides of the Emanation project to show the work you both did. One thing I found really interesting is that you both, I didn't even think about this when we invited you to come talk with us, but you both were in the same location on display in the museum, quite sort of ironically, I guess. So it's very interesting. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so I just wanted to touch back on the fact that both Allan and Virgil participated in a show at Eastern State Penitentiary curated by Julie Courtney, who participated in our first Emanation project as one of our guest curators, as well as became the curator for our most recent Emanations project. So she's always been part of the whole Emanation project and has brought us a number of amazing artists, as she did here for the Eastern State show. So again, it's interesting that both Virgil and Allan have sort of keep displaying in the same location. Here you see Virgil looking at some pieces of Durand art glass on display in the museum. As he mentioned, he was really taken by these pieces, especially with the color and the patterning. And so he used these to riff on for his piece. While on the right, you can see some of the work from Allan. You can tell he has a background as an architect with that scale human. So the way he's thinking about how the human body works with our built environment. Now, neither of them had experience with glass before coming to WheatonArts. You can see Virgil here is looking at color samples. So with his background as a painter, and as you saw in his presentation, he really expanded that into textiles and textures. He's looking here at the glass to see how these colors are going to work for his installation. You can see Allan is working with sketch here, holding up one of his sort of scale drawings to see how it gets translated into glass. I also want to mention that one of the exciting things about Emanation is, as you can see in the background of the picture of Allan, there's students and people in the stands at our glass studio. Because we are open to the public, that means everyone gets to see the whole process of what these artists are doing. So the people that were in the studio that day got to see Allan as he was exploring what glass could do. So it's really showing the whole creative process about what's happening and not necessarily just the final product of the installation. One thing that impressed me about both Virgil and Allan is that they stepped right in there into that studio. I know Allan mentioned he was maybe a little bit intimidated by the glass, but as you can see, and as you saw in his video, he, using his woodworking skills, was able to become part of that glass blowing process. You can also see Virgil here. He's working with Joe Matson on creating that patterning that happens in that Art Nouveau style glass. Joe Matson, if you're familiar with his work, often references that Art Nouveau, so he was a perfect person to work with Virgil on that. And so what Virgil's doing is snipping in to create a little bit of a pattern in that glass. Now, again, both of them, part of this process was working through the prototypes. And as I mentioned, having our studio create pieces that then they could review and look at. So you see here, they're each looking at some of the pieces based on the explanation and the design parameters they gave the glass blowers in the studio, and are reviewing to see how it came out to help shape how the project was going to move forward. Now this set of images, I think, really show their backgrounds. So you have Virgil here looking at the pieces in the light. So really looking at how that color is going to come through and that patterning, I think, speaking again to his background as a painter. And then with Allan here, you can see he's got sort of a model that he's looking at in comparison to what the final product is, again, speaking to that design side. They both worked out the display, so not just making the pieces, but how they're going to be installed in the museum. So you see Allan, as he showed us in the video, how he was going to have a piece worn over a mannequin. And then you can also see Virgil bringing us some of his fantastic wallpaper. Yes, we definitely needed more of Virgil's wallpaper in the museum. And to see how that swag works with the beautiful shapes and patterns of those vessels. So here is Virgil's final piece. Again, as he noted, the differences in patterning kind of reference back to a virus. The piece is called Broken Tulips, referencing to the way tulip patterns become broken due to a virus. Also, I think referencing the tulip mania, when tulips were quite the collectible. And as you can see here, there's a big collection of these pieces, harkening back to his beer can wallpaper. And of course, in a museum, harkening to everything we have on display and the fact that museums do hold large collections. And again, here is an image of Allan's final installation. Again, they're both in the same location in the museum, which is fantastic. And again, from the museum point of view, I appreciate that Allan saw glass and thought about it as a vessel, which is certainly a very traditional use of the medium of glass, and created these vessels, whether they're sort of internal organs that have been externalized, but they're still there to carry liquid or gas or something of the sort. So it was amazing to be able to work with them both, and I'm happy they're both here to share that with us. So now I am going to open up the floor to questions, but first, Allan had shared with us a little bit about what it was like to step into a glass studio. Virgil, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your first experience was like coming to Wheaton?
Sure. I mean, it's exciting because there are all these people working in concert, but I mean, it's a little scary because you always feel like you might trip and fall into a vat of molten glass or something, or touch something that's really hot and burn yourself badly. So, I mean, it's a little intimidating. But it reminded me a bit of when I worked as a screen printer, and when you're working as a team with other people to make something, and this kind of the beauty of the sort of dance and the flow of these people who are used to working together. It's really amazing to watch, and it's just great to be around it.
Great. And please, attendees, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. We did have a question for Virgil from his presentation. It was noticed that your earlier work referenced a little bit more of the hippie style with your blacklight wallpaper and your sort of funky color combinations, but then those later works looked a little more formal. Could you talk a little bit about that distinction?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been sort of interested in things that are out of fashion or considered passé, or that were once really popular that have now been poo-pooed. I mean, so I think when I was first starting out, I think also as a young artist, you kind of work with what you know. So I was kind of mining decorative styles that were popular in the 60s and 70s. But then as those things sort of become, and things cycle, so things become popular again. So as like more people started saying like, oh yeah, the 70s, it wasn't so ugly. And more designers and artists start working with it. I wanted to move on to other things that are considered passé. Like nobody's really collecting early American furniture now. Like if you watch Antiques Roadshow, the valuation of like a colonial tea table has gone like world.
Yeah, mid-century is the hot new thing.
Yeah, but it won't be forever. You know. So I'm sort of interested in when things fall out of fashion, or when things start out as high art and then trickle down to mass culture. I used to bowl a lot, and there was a bowling alley in St. Louis that had these room dividers between the bowling alley and the bar area, and they were sort of like this bastardized Jackson Pollock paintings. And I was always like loved that something that was considered like the pinnacle of high art at one point ends up being decoration in a bowling alley.
Yes, very, Very interesting. Well, one thing I noticed between both of your works, both at Wheaton as well as the works you showed us in your presentation, is on the one hand, and I think Allan mentioned this in an earlier conversation, is Virgil's work tends to be, you had the poofs and the mirrors that were about your parents. They represented more specific people, whereas Allan is more of a here's a house or small house design for an every person. Anyone could use this. And yet for your emanation work, Allan's was about your body, your personal body. And Virgil, you were speaking to sort of a broader sort of collecting sort of mentality with these Art Nouveau. Could you sort of speak to that balance between the specific and the universal?
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I could speak to it. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, working with my own students, and we're working on some site-specific private spaces for reading a very specific book. And, in reading literature, the more specific the text is to a particular culture, and the more specific it is to a particular time, the more universal it becomes. So when you push specificity to an extreme, it becomes universal. And when you push the universal to an extreme, it becomes specific. So it's specific in my case to body shape and body adornment, and the need for human survival. That's a kind of roundabout way of speaking about specificity versus universality. But I think it's a very interesting topic. How do you reference? I think in Virgil's case, you use a lot of art historical references. When I look at your looking glasses, it feels like you're referencing the palette of a painter, of a Hudson River School painter, but also you're also referencing the idea of, it seems like they're encaustic. I don't remember what the material is, but they feel like encaustic, which is another art historical medium. So I love your work for that reason. And it's interesting that we put together this team because, as I said, one approach is from the decorative arts, and one approach, or from the functional arts, and one is approaching from the artistic arts, and somehow we meet at the center, where we create ambiguity between the functional and the poetic. You're creating upholstered furniture. It's comfortable, quote, but it's totally poetic and referential and so on.
Well, I mean, I'm always don't call me a designer, because most of my things are not comfortable, or they're going to tip over, or they're going to break. They're not, I don't approach them the way I think a true good designer would, in terms of how can I make something that's not going to break, or how can I make something that can be mass produced? I'm always interested in how can I make something that can't be mass produced in a way, like the wallpapers. Exactly. I mean, the reason most wallpaper you see at Home Depot is so bad is because of limitations in terms of what the market will bear. It has to appeal to kind of the lowest common denominator.
Average taste.
And it also has to be something that can be produced economically, which means a repeat that is only 18 inches long or 24 inches long. So for me, the whole point of making my own wallpapers is I want to make a wallpaper that's got a repeat that's 11 yards that could never be put into production. That's where my interest lies. Stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I totally get into trouble because people do see my work as architecture or functional, and yet it isn't. There's no way that my work is comfortable, but people perceive me as a designer. And I get most of my, positive feedback from from designers and architects who find my work edgy, less so within the field of fine arts. So, it's a dilemma I have, because it's in approaching both extremes, function and poetry simultaneously, you tend to fall between the cracks. So you're not identified with either position, but I can't help myself. It's where I am. I like that ambiguity between those two fields. And I'm very proud of being an architect and very proud of being an artist, that kind of thing. So, and I know, anyway, but it's a question I've had and conversation we've had many, many years about this topic. What is architecture? And why do we really care what the categories are? As long as we're all doing provocative, edgy work that will make people think twice about the world.
That's sort of how I feel about it too, because as when I was in the painting program as a young student, and having teachers tell me like, serious art cannot be should not be decorative. A painting should not be thought of as something that would coordinate with your couch. And I always felt like, well, that's not how most people live with art. Like the art I had in my home growing up was like, it was either a reproduction or my great aunt Frida had done it. She was a sort of amateur painter. So and also I always felt like a really interesting, beautiful lamp is more interesting to me than a mediocre painting.
Yes.
Rather.
Yes. I know.
So in the olden days, when all the galleries were in Soho, like if I was walking around and I saw a bunch of not very interesting art shows, I could go to Moss and look at design, or go to a furniture store, and it was much more exciting.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Well, that's, that's fascinating, this interdisciplinary conversation. And I think that's one that touches, exactly on the medium of glass. This is a conversation that's had in this world in terms of, is it a craft? Is it fine art? So how did working with glass as a medium that's also as multidisciplinary as you two are, sort of add to your thoughts on that?
Well, it gave me, I always knew it was a difficult medium, but the amount of technical knowledge and skill involved in doing it well, it still is like humbling. The thing I feel like I can really do, I can screen print pretty well, but screen printing is nowhere near, like screen printing is like baby steps compared to like the amount of technical skill required to like make glass.
Yeah. One thing about, glass, as well as ceramics, was always the purview of the functional arts. They were functional vessels. And it took, people from, for instance, Dale Chihuly to Peter Volkos in the ceramics world to kind of defunctionalize glass and make it acceptable medium for fine artists. So they were very courageous in that role, because normally glass is associated with craft. And I think that's what's so courageous actually about Wheaton, is because you guys have gone out and seeked out curators within the fine art world to bring people in to create a kind of irritation, because you invite people who've never worked in glass, and they're they're fine artists. So I think that's really courageous of Wheaton. I think that's really quite amazing. And I was so pleased and proud to be part of that, of your organization for that reason. Now everyone fund Wheaton Art Class. There's a link there. You should. Now it's an uphill. I remember talking to I forgot who, someone maybe on the board. The amount of money it takes just for the gas to keep the fires burning is outrageous. So it's a tough medium to maintain. And there are very few artists who come out of RISD or come out of glassblowing departments who have an opportunity to work in glass, because it's not like you can go out and work in your own studio and have a glass shop. You need a facility like Wheaton to be able to blow glass, and you've given a lot of young people opportunities that they would not have had. So just a plug for Wheaton, and grateful for that opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And, you know, I work on the museum side. I don't want to speak for the folks in the studio, but I will. I know they love the challenge, and they learn as much as the artists we bring in to, you know, expand what it is that they can do with glass. So it's a really good relationship to keep us moving forward and trying new things as well. So we do have a question for both of you. First of all, a thanks from Brenda for answering the call to experiment in glass. And do you see your art evolving in any other direction? Allan, do you want to go for that first, and then we'll let Virgil respond?
I actually have a few projects. I'm still doing this chandelier in my studio, which I started a while ago, which I want to use in our house here on the North Fork, made out of discarded glassware. But in terms of what I'm doing now, you know, I hope to return to glass if I've given that opportunity, but I'm definitely, can I get something? This is a great, because I'm in my studio. I just want to show you.
Show and tell, show and tell. I love it.
Here, stay put.
This is why it's nice when you broadcast from your studios and you can
This is
rent
really
out
great,
and get something.
because what a
Okay,
great
what do you got?
segue. One other thing. Stay there. So I got so excited about glass that when I was given an opportunity, I'm collaborating with a chef or a food entrepreneur to do a reinvention of the Futures Cookbook. I
wow.
won't go there, but the Futurists were an amazing group of individuals, a little bit of a issue in terms of their sympathy with fascism and Nazism. So I have, you know, that kind of weird love-hate relationship to the Futurists. But the Futures Cookbook was an amazingly inventive book that was edited by Marinetti, who was a Futures poet. So working with this person, I said, I'm going to take the generic cup and saucer. And I started doing a series of variations on cup and saucer without changing it. So this is I don't know if you can see this, but this is
Oh, yes.
So this is a vitrine to contain a standard restaurant style cup and saucer. That's the pixelated version. And then you have this vitrine, if I can hold it without breaking it, which is the other extreme, which is less pixelated. So I am working in glass, despite the fact that I'm doing a cookbook and collaborating with some chefs, and we're colliding my work with chefs' work and so on. And we're creating, you know, performances and a cookbook. But anyway, that's a long story. I've spoken too much.
I love it. And I am definitely going to, you know, follow this project of yours, because that's amazing. Look at that. I love it. I love it.
Now blowing this would be something.
I bet
I
Sketch
would
would be
love
up
to
for the
do some
challenge.
more glass blowing. I would love to, especially continuing with wood blow molds. I was just getting started toward the end of the residency doing those wood blow molds, and I had a lot of other ideas for that.
Mhm.
Allan, could you hold that up one more time? Because when you weren't talking, then it wasn't. Oh, yes. Now I think everyone can see it a little better. Very interesting. Thank you.
So Virgil, to you again, thank you for answering the call to experiment with glass. So what I know after the Wheaton residency, you did some resin work, which has some similar properties to glass, and you also worked with sort of pulling those bottles, sort of the soda bottles. Do you want to talk a little bit about what direction your art is going and how the working with glass might have affected that?
I didn't actually pull those bottles. Those are collected. Other people pulled them. But I feel like now I maybe could pull my own bottles. But And I was working with resin before I came to Wheaton because it was a way for me, like with the chandeliers and that, was a way for me to approximate glass, which I knew was going to be really difficult, if not impossible, to make the things I was imagining out of glass. So I was working with resin because it was much more user-friendly.
Mhm.
And I'm hopefully going to be working on another glass project, but I'm not really at liberty to talk about it. So I'm just going to say I hope it's going to happen, because it is so seductive. It's such an amazing, it was like every day was like Christmas or something when I would come to Wheaton and see all the new things that had been blown in the days that I had been gone. I mean, it's also that thing about, like, I said, like, I can do screen printing, and screen printing is very immediate. As far as printmaking practices or printmaking processes go, it's like really quick. It's about the quickest you can get. Whereas like things like glass, where it's like, okay, we blow it and now we have to put it to slowly cool down, and you can come back in a few days and we'll see what it actually looks like. It was kind of nice to have to be forced to slow down like that, and also like not to know exactly what you're going to get. It's like
Yeah, that's something I'm very impressed with anyone who works with glass and has that level of patience to wait to see how it comes out, and the that they don't become so in love with it that they know it has time, and who knows what's going to come out of the annealer. So to have that sort of that
So exciting.
distance to the piece is, I feel, is it's kind of healthy to see that happen. We do have one comment that is not a question, but Anne wanted to say that it's always fun to watch artists who have spent their careers working in glass, but this presentation is particularly exciting to me in that a painter and an architect can bring their unique experiences and their individual narratives to a medium completely unknown to them, leading to a completely unique expression in glass. She loved Allan's multifunctional bicycle and house in the box. She adores Virgil's color sense, says everything is brilliant and stunning, and thanks us so much for sharing. So yes, I absolutely agree, and I'm really glad that she got that out of this conversation. And that's sort of the point of the Emanation project, is to bring different viewpoints, as we had been talking about earlier, to the medium of glass. Now there is a question for Allan. Your work is obviously prescient at this time. I'm interested in knowing if your current work deals with social distancing versus physical distancing, which was evident in the table piece.
Oh, I wonder who asked that question.
It's anonymous.
Oh, okay. The current work in terms of social distancing, I had done some pieces that you don't see here, which are photo-based pieces where I have chairs positioned in space with a glass wall between the chairs, so you can visually see through it to the space beyond, but there is there is a visual conversation that's happening, but there is isolation between them. In terms of distancing, I think that'd be really interesting, especially in terms of dinners. If we're doing a futurist dinner or proposals for futurist dinners, how would you create a series of dinners, which is really interesting now because so many restaurants are suffering. So how does a courageous chef put together food in such a way that it can be shared communally, but at distance? So is it possible to have a dinner party in a Zoom conference? So I had done a project which I proposed to an organization for their conference that's coming up, where I took this very same ceramic coffee cup, this one, which is so standard, and I dropped it on the ground from 1 meter off the ground, and it shattered into a lot of fragments. I dropped it 1 meter in memory of Marcel Duchamp's 3 standard stoppages, and creates a kind of random occurrence. And then I took each of those fragments and I glued each fragment onto a white paper cup. So 30 people, if there are 30 fragments, could drink from the same coffee cup. So I thought, if there are, 60 participants, let's say, or 40 participants in this webinar, we can now all drink from the same cup. If they were then sent in the mail to each of you at a certain time, we all toast each other with the same cup in different locations. So I want to play with this. I think this medium of Zoom is fantastic in so many ways. We're really learning a lot, and I think this will become a new art form. Even with my students, the very first day of studio, and I'm teaching product design at Parsons, I had them reading a statement by Milton Glaser, who is a wonderful American graphic designer who happened to die in June. And I wanted to do something in memory of Milton Glaser as an inventive person. And he wrote a text a while back in which he talks about the intersection of art and design. So I had each student read that text the very first day, sitting in front of their computers, all very depressed. They're not at Parsons. They're in their family home, in their bedrooms they grew up in. So they each read them for 30, half a minute, I guess. And then we kept pushing them and perfecting them. And then I said, okay, now go back and make a 30-second videotape of each of these people. And then we compiled them, and tomorrow it's going up on Art Daily, which I'm very excited about. I'm very proud of my students, all because of Zoom as a medium. So I'm hoping that this pandemic, although terrible in so many ways, will lead to something that's very positive. So that's social distancing. We're here having a wonderful conversation. I don't know if I would have been able to come down to Millville to have a conversation with Virgil. I wouldn't have met Virgil if it weren't for this type of social distancing. So something positive comes out of this problem. It's what art and design is all about. Problems becoming positives. The medium is the message.
Brilliant. And I think with the upcoming holidays, your ideas of that we can all drink from the same cup maybe is something we can all take home and add a little bit of creativity into our own lives, which is brilliant. And clearly, in the same way you've embraced glass as a new medium, you've embraced Zoom as a new medium, which is just so fantastic.
Maybe I'm being too optimistic.
So I was gonna say, Virgil, you worked a lot with, the environment around you with your furniture and the looking glasses, and how you were inspired by the colors you saw, like the looking glasses that reflected the colors of your parents' pill keepers. So how has being sort of in your own level of isolation affected your work, or caused you to think about your work differently, or approach it in different ways?
Well, I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I have some land in the Poconos, so I'm not like trapped in an apartment. And over the last few years, I've become a really avid gardener. So in a way, it was kind of like, oh, I get to be outside in the garden. And I've been thinking more and more about sculpture that would be made for outdoors. I mean, that doppelganger piece was partly about being outdoors, but it was not made to be outdoors, and that was part of. It had to be something that was not intended, like it was a couch that was not intended to be outdoors. So I don't, it's not a matter of making things so that they're resistant to the elements, but I've been thinking more and more about landscape. I think that's one thing that's been a change in my work since the beginning, actually, is like thinking mostly about like interiors and looking at books of interior design of the 60s and 70s was really important to me early on. But more and more I think about landscape. But, you know, I don't think landscape is not the same thing as nature. So like garden and garden design and the history of garden design, I think is going to become more and more of a thing for me.
Interesting.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's yeah, you've taken this sort of your interest you have in the built in the design and the colors and the aesthetics of the space, interior spaces we're in, but moved it outside in reference to this, you know, we're all being told to go outside, it's safer outside, and expanding our living spaces to the outdoors. So I think that's great. And I look forward to these new outdoor sculptures with your garden. Do you two have any questions for each other?
I had a thought about when Virgil brought up the issue of collaboration and the team. You know, one of the things that really impressed me when I first went down there, although, you know, I was at RISD and a friend of Dale Chihuly's, and architecture was on the same floor as glassblowing, or maybe the glassblowers were upstairs and I used to hang out there. But lately, and just seeing what a well-oiled team you need, and it's so well choreographed when someone blows a complex form, and that choreography and that collaboration is just fantastic, and so appreciated. So you know, I'm a bit of a loner. I like working alone in my studio, and that's why practicing architecture wasn't conducive to my personality. And architecture is one of the great collaborative arts. So, you know, I like the privacy and seclusion of a studio. But occasionally it's nice to come out, come out into the public and hang out with other craftspeople and artists and you know, be encouraged to participate in the different ways.
I think
I'm
actually a bit the opposite.
But that's what really impressed me.
I think part of the reason I'm a lapsed painter is I didn't like being alone by myself in the studio that much. And
cool.
So when I get a chance to work with other people, that's when I feel like I really get places. I mean, I still need alone time, but I also, I don't know, there's something about the freedom that comes like in a collaboration where it's kind of like, it gives you permission to make something really stupid or potentially a big failure.
Yeah.
Which I think is really freeing.
It's important. The most important thing about teaching is getting students to be stupid and not to worry about being profound, because that's so paralyzing.
Absolutely. Well, you know, anytime either of you want to hang out, you're more than welcome to come down and visit us.
Absolutely.
Here at
I'm
Wheaton,
picking you up
and
on that one.
yeah, see what's going on in the museum and hang out with the folks in the studio, see what they're making. You know, when we're post-COVID. There was one question about whether or not we're going to do an Emanation exhibit again in 2021. Since 2020 has been not the most ideal year, we are going to keep up our 50th anniversary exhibit through next year. So we're kind of shifting our exhibit plans around. So for 2021, we will be having our 51st anniversary year. I understand the Met is also celebrating their 151st anniversary next year, since they also had all their plans kiboshed by the year 2020. So keep an eye out for Wheaton, but I hope you're able to come down and see our 50th anniversary exhibition, of which there are some pieces from our previous Emanation shows in. So if there's no more questions, then we'll conclude our evening. Again, it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Allan and Virgil, for spending the evening with us. Again, I know I am in such a privileged and lucky position, because getting to work here at Wheaton at the museum means that I get to have these types of conversations with the artists that come through all the time. And it is definitely one of my favorite parts of my job. And I do what I can to convey what I learn in those conversations in our exhibitions. But I love, like Allan said, this is a great, let's look at the positive. This is fantastic. We're able to share these conversations with you. So thank you again so much, Allan and Virgil, for taking a chance and working with us at Wheaton, for creating such wonderful work and exhibitions for display in this museum, and for coming out and sharing about all your creative energies with us. It's been fantastic. There's the link there. You can see on the screen to both Allan and Virgil's website. So we heard a little bit about some future projects they're working on. So we'll have to keep in touch here and see how these projects go.
And
Also,
thank
please
you.
don't hesitate to reach out and contact anyone here at Wheaton. If you have any suggestions for future programming or have questions about today's talk. There's my email up there, so feel free to reach out. Again, would love to hear from you. Also, yes, I see Susan said in the chat to thank Julie Courtney. Certainly we have to thank Julie for connecting us with so many great artists. So before we leave you for tonight, I believe Marcy has a couple more things she wants to share with you. But again, thank you so much to everybody for joining us and being part of this wonderful conversation.
And thank you, Kristen, for walking us through the museum and getting us excited about glass and working with us in the museum to set up the installation. You have amazing amount of energy and commitment and enthusiasm for the field. So appreciated.
Well,
Yeah, thanks to everybody there.
Yeah.
Well, and I will thank you all as well. This has been absolutely fascinating and inspiring. And I have so many questions too. So you may get some text from me or some emails from me. I wanted to ask everyone to not forget to check out the pumpkin selection at shop.wheatonarts.org. You can find the fresh glass pumpkins the artists are making there, and you can purchase online, have it shipped, or arrange for curbside pickup, or come in person Saturdays and Sundays between 11 and 4. Also there, you can click on membership to view those options or make a donation. Those are in those links are in the chat, and I can send them to you as well. I'm going to leave you all and say goodnight with the slide for the next Wheaton conversation with Thais, Brightflower, Gould, Jacinto, and that's Thursday, November 5th at 6 p.m. So that was in the chat as well. I hope you had a chance to copy those. Again, if you need to get a download of the chat, I can help you with that as well. And that's, you can reach me at mpeterson@wheatonarts.org. And again, I'll leave you with that slide. Thank you all so much and good night.